The pines of Blackwood Forest stood like ancient sentinels, their dark green needles forming an impenetrable canopy that blotted out the late afternoon sun. It was the kind of deep forest where silence wasn't just an absence of noise, but a heavy, oppressive presence. A rusty station wagon bumped along the overgrown logging road, its suspension groaning in protest with every rut and rock. Inside, the mood was a mix of exhaustion and forced cheerfulness. Mark, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles were white, tried to mask his unease. "We're almost there," he announced, aiming for a reassuring tone. "Just another mile or two." Beside him, Sarah stared out the window, her reflection pale against the darkening woods. "You said it was a rustic retreat, Mark. This feels more like the setting of a horror movie." In the back seat, David laughed, though it sounded thin. "Come on, Sarah. A weekend completely off the grid is exactly what we need. No cell service, no emails, just us, nature, and far too much cheap beer." Next to David sat Leo, quiet as usual, wrapped in an oversized gray hoodie. He had been complaining of a stomach bug since they left the city, and his skin had a strange, clammy sheen. "I just want to lie down," Leo muttered, rubbing his temples. The cabin finally came into view, a dilapidated wooden structure leaning precariously to one side. Its windows were dark, resembling hollow eyes staring back at them. The roof sagged under the weight of decades of accumulated pine needles and moss. "Home sweet home," Mark said, forcing a grin as he cut the engine. The silence that rushed in was absolute. They unpacked in a hurry, eager to get inside before the chill of the evening set in. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and old dust. The meager light from their flashlights revealed a single large room with a fireplace, a rusty stove, and a few cots pushed against the walls. Leo immediately claimed the cot furthest from the door, curling into a tight ball. "I'm going to sleep," he grunted, pulling his hood tight around his face. "You okay, man?" David asked, stepping closer. "You look worse than before." "Just cold," Leo rasped, his voice sounding strangely deep and raspy. "Leave me alone." Mark built a fire in the hearth, the crackling flames offering a small comfort against the encroaching darkness. They opened a few beers and tried to settle in, but the atmosphere remained tense. The forest outside seemed to press against the thin walls of the cabin, an unseen entity observing their every move. Around midnight, a low, guttural moan echoed from Leo's corner. Sarah jumped, spilling her drink. "What was that?" "It's just Leo," David said, though he didn't sound convinced. He grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the cot. "Hey, buddy, you need water." The beam of the flashlight hit the cot. Leo was thrashing under the blankets, his body contorting in unnatural ways. A sickening crack echoed in the quiet room, like wet wood splintering. "Leo," David's voice trembled. The blankets were thrown back with violent force. Leo sat up, but it wasn't the Leo they knew. His face was elongated, the jaw distended and hanging open at a grotesque angle. His eyes, usually a soft brown, were now entirely black, reflecting the firelight with malevolent intelligence. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, stretched taut over bones that seemed to be shifting and growing beneath the surface. Another wet crack sounded as Leo's shoulders broadened, tearing the seams of his hoodie. He let out a shriek that was half human, half animal, a sound that vibrated deep in their chests. "What the hell is wrong with him?" Sarah screamed, backing away until she hit the wall. "I don't know," Mark yelled, grabbing the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. "Leo, snap out of it." The thing that used to be Leo didn't respond to his name. It lurched off the cot, its movements jerky and uncoordinated, like a puppet controlled by an amateur. Its hands had elongated into vicious, bony claws, dripping with a dark, viscous fluid. Before anyone could react, it lunged. It didn't go for Mark, who was armed, it went for David. With terrifying speed, it crossed the room and slammed David against the wall. David's scream was cut tragically short as the creature's claws sank deep into his chest. Blood sprayed across the dusty floorboards. "David!" Sarah shrieked, paralyzed by terror. Mark swung the iron poker with all his might, striking the creature hard across the back. The blow would have shattered a normal man's spine, but the creature barely registered it. It slowly turned its head, its neck clicking in a sickening rhythm. The black eyes locked onto Mark. "Run," Mark screamed, shoving Sarah toward the door. "Get to the car." Sarah didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled for the heavy wooden door, her hands fumbling with the rusty latch. Behind her, she heard the sickening sound of tearing flesh and Mark's desperate shouts. She managed to yank the door open and sprinted into the freezing night. The darkness of the deep forest swallowed her instantly. She could barely see a foot in front of her face, but the sounds from the cabin spurred her on. Mark was screaming, a high-pitched wail of pure agony that suddenly abruptly stopped. Tears streaming down her face, Sarah ran toward where the car was parked. Her foot caught on a thick root, and she went sprawling into the dirt, scraping her hands and knees raw. She scrambled back up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She reached the station wagon and yanked on the handle. Locked. "No, no, no," she sobbed, patting down her pockets. She didn't have the keys. Mark had them. A sound from the tree line made her freeze. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't a normal animal. It was a heavy, deliberate crunching of dead leaves and snapping twigs. Crunch, crunch. It was circling her. Sarah pressed her back against the cold metal of the car, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Leo," she whispered into the darkness, a desperate plea for the friend she knew to still be in there somewhere. A low, vibrating growl was her only answer. The scent hit her then, a pungent, copper smell of fresh blood mixed with something rotten and earthy. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the trees. It was massive now, easily 7 feet tall, its limbs disproportionately long and ending in those awful, dripping claws. It moved with a terrifying grace, the jerky, uncoordinated movements gone. The transformation was complete. It tilted its head, observing her like a predator admiring trapped prey. The moonlight broke through the canopy just enough to illuminate its face. It was completely hairless, the skin a mottled gray. The jaw hung open, revealing rows of jagged, uneven teeth. But the eyes were still black voids, devoid of any humanity. "Please," Sarah begged, her voice barely a whisper. The creature lunged. Sarah dove under the station wagon just as the creature's claws swiped the air where her head had been, leaving deep gouges in the metal door. She wriggled into the narrow space beneath the undercarriage, trying to make herself as small as possible. The ground was cold and damp, smelling of oil and wet earth. She could see its feet, misshapen, clawed things, pacing around the vehicle. It let out a frustrated shriek and began slamming its heavy fists onto the hood of the car. The metal buckled and groaned under the assault. Bang, bangs, bang. Dust and rust rained down on her. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, clamping her hands over her ears to block out the terrifying noise. She prayed to whatever would listen that the car would hold, that the creature would lose interest and leave. Suddenly, the banging stopped. The forest descended into that oppressive silence once more. Sarah held her breath, straining to hear over the pounding of her own heart. Had it left? She waited. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Nothing but the wind rustling the pine needles. Slowly, carefully, she opened her eyes and peered out from under the car. The area around her was empty. The creature was gone. A wave of relief washed over her, followed immediately by a sharp pang of guilt. David and Mark were dead, brutally murdered by whatever Leo had become. She had left them, but what else could she have done? She needed to get out of the forest. Without the keys, driving was impossible. She would have to walk out. It was a long trek down the logging road, but if she stayed here, she was dead. She began to shimmy out from under the car, moving inch by inch to avoid making any noise. She got her head and shoulders out, pulling herself up onto her elbows. She paused, listening, still silence. She pushed herself up, ready to make a run for the road. As she stood, a drop of warm, viscous liquid hit her cheek. Sarah froze. The scent of copper and rot flooded her senses. Slowly, terrified of what she would see, she looked up. The creature was perched on the roof of the station wagon, crouched like a gargoyle. Its black eyes bored into hers, It hadn't left. It had been waiting. A sickening grin stretched across its distorted face, revealing those jagged teeth. Before Sarah could even draw breath to scream, the creature dropped down upon her, its claws outstretched, dragging her back into the eternal, silent darkness of the deep forest. The woods remained quiet, the ancient pines standing as silent witnesses to the slaughter. The deep forest kept its secrets, absorbing the blood and the screams, waiting patiently for the next unsuspecting visitors to arrive.